Okay, so this is my history project mini lesson for world history class, and I did my project on Inca engineering and empire building, and my name is Allison Love. So I do have my notes here, and I have my slideshow as well, so I'll be referencing both as I'm presenting. So the Inca Empire existed from 1400 to 1533 BCE. It was the Western Hemisphere's largest population, located in the Andes mountain ranges. And off to the right-hand side, I have a little globe there. In the Western Southern America, you'll see the dark green section. That's how far the Incan Empire expanded their reign. And that reached about 900,000 square kilometers. So the Incas focused on empire building, innovation, and belief systems, all before colonial encounter. But their empire building used their military, the innovation helped sustain their population, and their belief systems revolved around much religion. They were a very religious group of people. And their engineering achievements are what integrated, sustained, and expanded their empire throughout their reign. So some key historical facts is just kind of overview of what we'll be talking about. The Incan Empire was held together by a centralized government and a Mita labor system. And so their centralized government had 4 quarters, which they referred to as Taiwan Tinsuyu. And those 4 sections were each governed by relatives of the king himself. And they would report back to the king, and that's how their system of government worked. The Mita labor system wasn't a coin-based economy, and so citizens would pay labor tax by working on public projects like roads, terraces, or serving as a warrior in the military. Inca engineering was revolved around agriculture, roads, and temples for religion and government. Their roads they created was one of the most sophisticated of its time, spanning over 40,000 kilometers, and sometimes leading to temples for religious and political power. And often with this empire, religious and political power were intertwined. So the king himself claimed descent from the god which they praised, and those temples that were built across the empire centralized that religious control. And during their empire's reign, the Inca encountered civil war, Spanish conquest, and European diseases, ultimately leading to their demise in 1532 BCE. And so we'll talk about that as well. So the people of the Incan Empire, both men and women married young. Men typically married at 20 years old, and women typically married at about 16. And they formed units that shared labor obligations. The family unit, which was referred to as Ailu, was the basis of Inca society. So the Inca Empire was also highly hierarchical. The Sapa Inca was the king, the emperor, had absolute power over everybody, and he claimed divine descent from the sun god, which they praised. And so the Sapa Inca was referred to as the king. Under him was nobility, and they were typically elite ruling class, and usually relatives of the Sapa Inca. They governed the provinces, the 4 quarters. They would also lead armies, and they would also lead religious ceremonies. So they were very important, though not having as much power as the emperor himself. And under nobility are artisans and craftspeople, and they typically worked in textiles, metalworks, and pottery. These people typically worked in workshops, and those workshops were state-ran. Under them were farmers and commoners, which is the largest class, and they worked on growing food, building infrastructure, and paying the Mita labor tax. And the Mita labor tax is in the form of state work, infrastructure, warrior work, anything that contributes to the well-being of the state itself. And then number 5, the Yanaconas, they were permanent servants to the state of nobility. And once they were in that position, they typically didn't leave that position. So building an empire, Inca only had 2 dynasties throughout its empire. The first dynasty was Ayarmanco, known as the first Sapa Inca of the Huron dynasty. He also claimed divine descent of the sun god Inti, which began not only their religion, but their empire and their traditional ways as well. He stayed inside the Cusco Valley, not expanding much past it, nor building up the military to do so. In the second dynasty, in 1410, the Hanan dynasty came into power. It was also the last dynasty to come into power, and Viracocha Inca was the first of it, ruling in 1410. Though at the same time there was an indigenous tribe called the Chanca people that came into contact with Cusco Valley and attacked. Viracocha fled at that time and left his son in charge, which his son then rallied forces and defeated the Chanca, taking the name of Pachacuti. And Pachacuti's rule began in 1438. He transformed Cusco from a small kingdom into an imperial power, using military expansion as well, and this marks the beginning of the Incan Empire as a dominant Andean civilization that lasted from 1438 until 1528 BCE, under Pachacuti and his successors. Over that time, the Inca unified over 10 million people of diverse cultures. And off to the right-hand side here, you can see all the way from the green down to the yellow. That's how far the Incan Empire expanded throughout that time. And those regions include modern-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, and Colombia. And so engineering in the Incan Empire, agriculture was the main one, combined soil science, irrigation, and microclimate manipulation. These used terraces throughout the mountainous range, which reduced erosion, retained moisture, and maximized the arable land in the highlands, which was a really big innovation for its time because the mountainous terrain could always be dangerous, and they figured out ways to actually use that for food and surplus of calories. So canals, aqueducts, and reservoirs also contributed to the growing of crops, and that reshaped the landscape for flowing water to access those terraces. And the terraces were what was between the mountains, containing all of their food. The Incas understood the principles of seismic engineering. Their walls of architecture were flexed with the ground to withstand earthquakes, so a lot of the stonework that they did actually still stands today, which we'll see some of that later as well. Engineering projects were practical but also political and religious. So a lot of their road networks could be linked to sacred sites and state temples as well. Terraces, roads, everything was intertwined with religion and political power as well. Architecture also reflected cosmological principles aligning with the solstices. So every part of their world revolved around their religion and their Sapa Inca. So the end of an empire for the Incas, Sapa Inca Quapac got sick in 1522, which was around the same time as the Spanish conquistadors reached the Caribbean, bringing diseases. And Quapac was the last of Pachacuti's sons, and he had 2 sons of his own, Atahualpa and Huascar. After he died, he left them to rule in 1528. And both wanted to rule the Incan Empire, which began a civil war to take over. And so you'll see here off to the right-hand side, Cusco Valley is down here in the left off into the southern Americas, and right above it you'll see the Caribbean Sea. And so it didn't take the Spanish conquistadors that long to ultimately travel and reach down into the Cuzco Valley. After Atahualpa won the Civil War, he shortly after encountered the Spanish. Francisco Pizarro was the conquistador that led 168 men. And the Spanish conquistador shocked the Inca with guns, horses, European armor, Toledo steel weapons, and the ways of their fighting. He conquered the Inca, the capital fell, and the population was destroyed from within by civil war, imperial weakness, and European diseases as well. And so the Inca Empire sort of ceased to exist shortly after that. And here are some sources. These are things that are still known today that we see. So the agricultural terraces, these were used for Inca's surplus of food and to ensure watering and nutrients reach all levels within the mountainous terrain. It was crucial for feeding large populations and sustaining the empire that crops were made this way. Up above here, we see Machu Picchu. This is an Incan citadel built in the 15th century during Pachacuthi's reign, 8,000 feet above sea level. And it includes temples, plazas, terraces, royal residence, all tied to the Incan astronomy and spirituality. So again, all of their stonework and everything was tied to their religious and political power. Underneath was Quipo, which is their system of knotted cords to record information, having no written language. This is the form of communication other than verbal that the Incas would use to communicate. These were typically made from llama or alpaca wool, and they were used to collect census data, tribute records, and agricultural inventories. And so on the very last, we have here takeaways and the lasting impact. So the Incas had incredible engineering without iron, steel, or wheels, and that created architecture that still stands today. Their architecture adapted to mountainous terrain and is actually a tourist attraction in Peru today. Machu Picchu is. Centralized control through the Mita system. This system has citizens contribute work rather than money, straying from a traditional economy, though proving it was just as efficient. Which it was, because they still contributed somehow, even if it wasn't coin-based. A diverse, unified empire, ruling over millions of different ethnic groups. They maintained unity through religion, infrastructure, and political organization. And they were actually looked up to, even though having conquested as far as they did, they were able to communicate, worship, and have a life with other people. Communication without traditional writing technique. So this is something too that requires intellectual complexity. Quipo is their version of a written language, though having no letters. So using strings, verbal language, rituals, and road work to integrate distant peoples and communicate with each other is definitely something that we don't see today that is an impact on the world now, because we look back and see what they were able to accomplish. Okay, and that's my video.